we are going to start by doing some timeline, frame-by-frame, hand-drawn animation in Photoshop. And I'm using Photoshop CS4, as you can see. This works with any Photoshop that has animation capabilities, timeline animation capabilities. CS4 greater, I would assume, maybe CS3, I'm not sure, but definitely CS4 and greater. Now, in order to do this, I am going to create a new file, and here's the hitch, here's the important thing. That file needs to be a film and video file. That's very important. As you can see, there's different kinds of files Photoshop lets me make. So film and video. And then the next thing I can choose is what format do I want to work with? I'm going to choose NTSC, digital video format, and that automatically gives me a width and height of 720 by 480, resolution 72 pixels an inch. Background contents are white on this one, which is fine. All right. So this results in a screen that looks like this. And what I have are action safe and title safe. So title safe is falling out here. Action safe would be inside the bluish lines that you see there. So for my animation, I want to work inside the blue area. Okay, if I'm outside here somewhere, depending on if this was going out to TV, you may not see the action happening out here. So first thing we're going to do is talk about different kinds of layers. I'm going to make a layer that's going to be my art layer. So this is really my layer where I'm going to have a tree, for example. So I'm going to put my tree layer there. As you can see, this layer comes up with little checkerboards behind it. And that means this little checkerboard pattern means that I have a transparent layer here, which is what I want, because even though I'm going to be drawing a tree in here, I might want to see behind the tree, like if I were going to put clouds or something like that. So I'm going to start my drawing, and I've just got a brush selected, and using the brush tool, I've got a small diameter, because I want to work very roughly, kind of lightly, so that I can come back later and work a little bit, darker, more intensely if I want. One of the things that you'll run into is if you have snap turned on, which is right over here, snap will conform your drawing to a grid or guidelines. So you want to make sure, if you're kind of doing freehand drawing here and you don't want to deal with having your drawing conform to a straight line here, that you turn snap off. So here's the root of my tree, trunk of my tree. I'm going to extend the tree. Tree is going to start breaking off into, I guess you call these branches. And this side's going to go up as well. And then we'll have like sort of this middle inside branch here as well. And again, you notice I'm not really doing too much erasing or anything. If I want to change something, I just kind of change it in the drawing. One thing you want to do is to make sure that when you're drawing something that you really sort of are adding some dimension to it. So one of the things that I like to do when, like for example, if I'm drawing branches, is I kind of like to start a little bit, inside the big limbs, right? And that sort of looks a little bit more dimensional, for example, than just sticking it off like that. The other thing that sometimes I see students do that's kind of a common drawing mistake is that they will actually have limbs get bigger. For example, they might do something like this. Well, obviously a limb isn't going to grow like that. That's a weird tree that grows a limb like that. So I'm going to erase that. So anyhow, I'm going to continue to make these limbs. I guess these are branches, whatever these things are called. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to start thinking about the fact that we're going to animate a leaf. So we want to create a different kind of a layer to do that. We're going to come over here to Layer. We want to come over here to Video Layer. And we want to insert a new blank video layer. I could also put a video layer in from a file. That would allow me to rotoscope video if I wanted to, but I'm not doing that right now. So I'll take that. This is my new blank video layer, and I'm going to call this layer Leaf, so that I know what I'm working with. As you can see in the animation timeline, I can tell I'm working in the leaf layer. Okay, so I'm on frame 1 over here in my animation timeline. I'm going to direct your attention over to this little arrow, this little like sort of arrow with some lines over here in the corner of the timeline. This pops up a really valuable panel that lets you do a lot of different things with this document. We can start by looking at the document settings. So I'm just below 10 seconds here. I've got a frame rate of 29.97. I'm actually going to change that frame rate for right now to 24 frames per second. And at times I might actually work doing shooting on 2s, which would mean working at 12 frames per second, but in a 24 frame per second space. Okay, so we're going to start over here, and I'm going to draw my first little leaf. Okay, so that's where my leaf is going to start. Okay, cute little leaf. All right. Now I want to know, how is my leaf going to travel to the ground? And so one of the things I'm going to do is give myself a path, and I'll call this layer path. I'm going to put path underneath leaf. I'm going to take a pen, and I'm going to think about what this leaf is going to do. So I think when it first comes off, I'm going to have it go with a little brush of wind, sort of like up into the air. And then I think I'm going to have it do a little bit of a tumble. Okay, a little bit of a tumble here. And then I'm going to have it go this way. And then I'm going to have it start to go down, 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 down to the ground. If I was kind of real fancy, I could actually put another layer, which would be a bunch of little leaves. Actually, let's do that. Let's add another layer, and I'll call this pile o' leaves. That's kind of fun. All right, so pile of leaves I'm going to have here, and put that underneath my path. And this is just going to be a little pile of leaves. I'm going to come back and kind of do this a little bit more detailed later, but why I want to make this little pile of leaves here is so that maybe when my leaf falls into these, it can have a little bit of reaction, right? A little bit of like follow-through action at the bottom down here. Like it might fall into these leaves, and then the leaves can kind of like jump up or something like that. Anyhow, I'm just going to plan that sort of ahead of time, but not worry too much about it. Go back to my leaf. All right, I'm ready to go. So, a couple of things. I want to be able to advance a frame at a time. In order to do that, I need to make sure that I have enabled timeline shortcut keys highlighted. Whoopsie, let's open that. So enable timeline shortcut keys must be highlighted. And what that allows me to do, look at my timeline down here, it allows me to go back and forth in the timeline. And I'm using the arrow keys on the keyboard to do that. So this allows me to go to my next scene and draw my next frame and draw my next leaf, but I can't see the previous one. So I enable onion skinning, and what that allows me to do is to see the frames that come before and the frames that come after. That's onion skinning is an animation term from classic animation, hand-drawn animation. So we're going to apply onion skinning so that I can see. So now I'm 3 frames ahead, so I cannot see what's in frame 1. So I'm just going to go 2 frames ahead. First thing I'm going to do is apply what we call the principle of anticipation. And what anticipation is, it's one of the 12 principles of animation. And what it does is it usually happens, I think it always happens actually, at the beginning of an animated action. And why it's useful is that it alerts the viewer that this object is about to have an action or make an action. So like a baseball player winding up for a pitch, anticipation is sort of what happens before the action. So in this case, before this leaf starts off in this direction, it's kind of getting its energy by going backwards first. And so now it's gotten its energy. So now it's going to come back around. And in fact, it's actually going to change its direction a little bit even. And now it's going to start moving along this timeline. I'm sorry, this path and timeline. So the next thing I want to do is start to think about this idea of stretching and squashing. So as it's going, making those big movements, I'm going to stretch it out a little. But as it starts to go around this curve, I'm going to squash it a little. Stretch and squash. And as it's going around the curve, I'm actually going to make the spacing closer. So this, in essence, will make the movement around this curve seem pretty believable. Okay. All right, so I can keep on doing this and doing it and doing it. What I'd like to do, though, is continue to show you what you can do with animation in Photoshop, but I'm really loving right now just animating this leaf. But so that I can show you what to do here, I'm going to go ahead now and just play back a little bit of this that we have. All right, so you can see these are just a few frames that have been animated. Now, if I want to, I can turn onion skinning off, and I can turn my path off, so now I can get a kind of a better picture on what's happening here. I can slow this leaf down in a number of ways. That mostly comes through spacing and timing of how I lay out, how I lay out those, the drawings across the 24 frames. That's kind of an animation principle unto its own. Perhaps time for a different demo for that. But anyhow, for right now, I want to just cover a few other things that are really helpful for people working with animation and Photoshop. A couple of other things that you should know. Because you have enabled timeline shortcut keys, you can always come over here to keyboard shortcuts. And we're going to look for layer, because we want to know how can we do more keyboard shortcuts that would be useful for layer animation. And if we come down to video layers in the keyboard shortcuts, you can see there's all these things like duplicating frame, deleting frames, inserting a blank keyframe. All of these things really help us maximize our workflow. So for example, a lot of times you want to be able to duplicate a frame or delete a frame. So let's click this. I already actually have set up for duplicate frame. So if I'm over here, let's get to that last leaf, let's say. Where is that last leaf? There he is. Ooh, I just saw him. Okay. So if I come over here, you can see this frame doesn't have a leaf. Well, let's take this frame and let's duplicate it. Oops. Let's take this frame and let's duplicate that frame moving forward. So now you can see that I have that leaf on all of those frames duplicated. Now what happens if I want to actually come here and I'm not happy with the drawing of that leaf? Well, that's simple. That's just erase and redraw. But what if I wanted actually to insert a new frame in there? So, or a new frame, new drawing. So that's simply insert a blank frame, and then again you can assign that to a keyboard shortcut. Pretty easy. Lots more stuff you can do, but that's kind of the basis for that. The last thing I'm going to show you, we're going to make a new layer. I'm going to call it Cloud. This layer is going to actually go behind the tree. My assumption is that later on I would continue to color the tree, kind of like hide, the tree would then hide the cloud. That's why I'm putting the cloud underneath the tree. All right, so now I'm going to oh, one thing students ask me actually before I go on. sometimes kids will lose things, like they'll lose their animation panel or they'll lose one of these things and they'll be like, oh my goodness, where is that? So you just go to the window tool or the window panel and you just pull that, that panel up again and it's no problem. Okay, so let's go to this cloud. I want to make sure again that I'm drawing with my brush. I'm going to just select, actually, let's get one of these cool texture brushes over here. Let's get this guy. I love the brushes in Photoshop. I think for me, one of the things I animate with all kinds of things from 2D to 3D, and one of the things that I really, really enjoy about Photoshop animation is being able to use all these really cool brushes for animation. I think it's very cool. I love Flash, and I think that Flash is great, for lots of stuff. But I feel very artistic when I'm working with Photoshop, animating frame by frame. It really kind of harkens, for me, back to the days of kind of classic hand-drawn, gorgeous, beautiful animation, and I just love that. All right, so I'm just right now making, just roughly, kind of quickly, as you can see, a cloud. All right, and I think I'm going to move that up a little bit. All right, so the other thing I want to do is I'm going to transform this cloud so that it's off the screen. Cool. And then I'm going to move it this way because I want to animate this cloud, but this time I'm going to use some keyframe animation to do that. One thing I want to do though before that is I want to just apply a little bit of a motion blur, although I kind of like the effect of that that brush. But let's go ahead and let's do let's see. We could do, we can get some really nice cloud effects by adding some blurs. So let's just use this kind of a blur to make a kind of a snowy scene. Okay, so we'll start over here. You, of course, could spend a lot more time doing this and probably make something that looks much better. But, whoa, stop. No. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to come down here to the old cloud layer. We are going to open up cloud. We're going to be at the first frame over here. We're going to click on position. Ooh, and that little guy shows up, that little yellow guy. That's my first keyframe. And I'm going to set a keyframe right there by clicking in that little white area that turns yellow once I place a keyframe. So keyframing is cool because I can move this cloud over to, let's see, I guess it's the left. And then what happens is keyframing is like interpolating between one keyframe and the next, and it makes all those frames in between. It just moves those layers around. So that's very cool. Obviously, that speed seems to be going like really, really, really fast. So I might move that keyframe way out so that those clouds are going much slower. I could also do something like, take the opacity of that kind of in. Now let's play it. All right, so we get a little bit of movement back there and continue to do that. All right, so that's about it. Now, the next thing we would want to do, of course, is export this great piece of animated art that we've created. So we come over to File, Export, Render Video. So very often, students just save movies as QuickTime movies, and they make these huge movies that they can't really, do anything with because they're like gigabytes wide, gigabytes of storage. So what we want to do is we want to figure out what is the best way to output this movie. So we're going to make it a QuickTime movie, which is fine. We're going to go in and use the H.264 compression. That will compress the video. We can determine, how much compression, what the quality is going to be, how much compression we're applying to the video, which is every time we compress video, we are, or a picture, we're throwing information out. So that's kind of an art to get to know, like at what point are you throwing too much information away. But we'll go between like high and best on this guy. Let's go high. All right, let's go ahead. That all looks good. My size is determined by the size I originally set in by the H.264, by the way. So we'll call this tree and cloud animation, something like that. And then we render it out. And that process takes a little while. So go ahead and render that. Do, 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 do. And when that's finished, that will play back as a QuickTime movie. Alrighty. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.